EA Games.
Challenge everything.
And Tony Romano. For AFR original airings of the Command performances, GI Journal, and Mail Call.
With the ongoing war efforts and the lack of secured space for defensive and strategic planning, the once temporary U.S. building in Virginia, dubbed the Pentagon, appears to be filling a more permanent status. Defense and military personnel commented on the location and accessibility of the building and are looking to keep this a more permanent facility. The Pentagon was opened in January of this year and...
There were times when guys that were still alive were tagged dead because the doctors and the corpsmen spent their time trying to save those that they thought they could save.
And when you coming in on a ship and you see all the gun turrets swinging around pointing at you, and you're still a minute away, you know there's not much chance of surviving that.
And the other thing that always bothered me was burying them alive.
Quite an array of sound, listening to torpedoes and bombs explode while a band on a battleship is playing Star Spangled Banner.
To this day, in the quiet of my own thinking, I can hear the wicked whisper of the Nambu machine gun.
The early days on Parris Island were very, you might say, hectic, to the extent that we had about 8 weeks at the most to get our platoons ready to ship out. The average day would be from 0500 to 2200 at night. We had 2 weeks on the rifle range. I don't care what some people might say, but that rifle was his lifesaver. That rifle was like their sweetheart, their sister, their mother. Hey, it was either kill or be killed. We had to teach them the ability to handle themselves in such a way that they were able to protect themselves as well as help protect their own fellow Marine. And that's the important thing about that, saving a Marine's life.
I was on the USS Tennessee at Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, 1941. About 7:50 or thereabouts, I went up to the top side, and about that time they sounded general quarters, and I heard an explosion on the ship next to us, which was the USS West Virginia. I arrived at my battle station, and the first bomb landed on turret 2. A couple of minutes later, the bomb hit turret 3, about 35 feet from where I was.
The memories that I have are of the ships exploding. Saw the Arizona go boom. Saw the West Virginia and the Oklahoma go over and then back over. When you see a battleship turn over and roll over, and guys falling out and jumping into the water, into the flames. That's the memories I have.
That's mainly what the operation was for, to make the Japanese start thinking, well, are they hitting Guadalcanal or are they hitting over there in the Marshall Gilberts? There were about 200 of us, 100 on one sub and 110 on the other. There were 10 boats on each sub, and we'd inflate them by hand and put them in the water and then make for the beach, which is what we did when we hit Macon Island. Sergeant Clark was in front of me. I was facing the machine gun, feeding the ammunition at the time. And all of a sudden I heard a pop, and his head went sideways. He's looking at me, and I realized he had one right between the eyes. About that time, I think it was Parsons, he kind of got up on his haunches and shot that Japanese out of the coconut palm. After we got into the evening, which was time to leave, get back to the subs, there were 61 still left on the island. A lot of them were wounded. They couldn't get off the island because of the surf. Well, we were lucky enough to get aboard the sub, so they asked for volunteers to go back and started hitting a little bit rougher water outside the lagoon. And we were supposed to meet the sub at 10:30 that night and unloaded all of the wounded, and everybody got aboard the sub. And we left a few fellows behind.
Tarawa was invaded by the 2nd Marine Division, and that division only. They were the ones that took the blunt of the assault from the beach defenses. There was a pier that the Japanese had that extended out across the reef for almost a half a mile. A lot of Marines managed to get ashore by using the pier for cover, but a lot of the guys who were in the Higgins boats were dumped out on the water and had to wade in. And many times it was over their head when the ramp was open and the guys jumped off and they just disappeared, went right on down. Most of them did not have a chance to get their equipment off and come to the surface. And they're still down there. By rights, no Marine should have ever set foot on Tarawa. The Japanese admiral there, in charge of the island, had bragged that it would take 1 million men 100 years to take Tarawa. But the men of the 2nd Marine Division did it in only 76 hours, and that was something absolutely incredible. We lost over 1,000 Marines that died during the battle. These guys that took Tarawa, in my opinion, were the greatest fighters in the world. And when they're gone, the world will never see the likes of them again. To every Marine, every corpsman was a hero. We looked to them like a godfather. We depended on them for our survival, and we knew that if we ever got hit or wounded, and we called for corpsmen, if there was one within calling distance, he would be there.
I saved lives, and that was my job. That was my focus. The very first casualty I took care of was hit right through the jaw. The bullet went across his tongue, cut his tongue, went out the other side. And I thought to myself, this guy's a mess, a mess. I got to him and just took his head in my hand and reached in his mouth and dug out pieces of teeth and gum. I saw that he was trying to swallow his tongue, so I got out a forceps out of my medical kit, clipped his tongue to his lower lip, so he wouldn't swallow it, so he wouldn't drown in his own blood. And I reached inside of his mouth and put in a wad of bandage, a compression bandage, so that would absorb some of the blood. Then I got some plasma going in him, and I couldn't give him a shot of morphine when the pain did return, and it began to return fairly rapidly. I found out later, just this week, 2 weeks ago, that guy is okay. He's okay. The only thing that he now has is 2 dimples in his cheek, one on each side, and he's fine. He's fine.
You can't say anything about the corpsman that's good enough. That is, in my view, and I think most Marines feel that way. They were exposed to as much danger and maybe even more sometimes, because they were scurrying around down there. And sometimes they had 2 or 3 guys that were hit, and these guys are going from one to the other, taking care of them and risking their lives every moment. And we lost a lot of them too. And if you yell corpsman, if you yell for help, they came, no matter what. There is a camaraderie there that exists in very few units anywhere else in the Marines. You're like best friends and married to each other and brothers, and it all sounds like a big, massive cliche, but it's true, And they say you're never a former Marine. You're just a Marine who's not in service, at that time. And that's true, too.
It was a rite of passage for me. I was 17 when I went in, quickly turned 18. But it was a rite of passage from boy to man.
How they ever got off the beach, I don't know. How they ever managed to extract the Japanese out of those bunkers, out of their machine gun nests, I don't know. They were marvelous, marvelous men. And I'm proud to have been associated with them.
I deem it an honor to have served in the greatest fighting organization in the world today, the United States Marine Corps.
.13-inch bayonets polished to a sheen. 9-pound M1 Garands ready for battle. 24 soldiers trained to perfection. There are no commands, only dedication and precision. Their actions speak of unwavering discipline. They travel 50,000 miles, performing 200 times each year. From the drill line to the front line, they are Marines. They are the Silent Drill Platoon.
and Tony Romano. Keep it on this dial for AFR original airings of the command performances, GI Journal, and Mail Call.
With the ongoing war efforts and the lack of secured space for defensive and strategic planning, the once temporary U.S. building in Virginia, dubbed the Pentagon, appears to be filling a more permanent status.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
At the start of the Pacific War, leaders in both Japan and the United States knew that the battle between their two countries would be fought not only on the front lines, but also in the hearts and minds of civilians and soldiers. It was imperative that they boost the morale of their own people and undermine the spirit of the enemy. This war of ideas and images would become known as the Thought War. As the Pacific War began, the United States and Japan recruited their top artistic and intellectual minds from the realms of advertising, motion pictures, and print media to create a wide variety of propaganda programs. Though propaganda had been employed in earlier wars, propaganda in World War II reached new levels of sophistication and manipulation.
Let's all back the attack. Let's stand by the ones who are man of the guns and pushing the foe on back.
U.S. domestic propaganda influenced all aspects of daily American life. Radio broadcasts reminded the listener to buy war bonds. Newspapers and magazines featured fear-based information on the devious nature of our enemies. Still, the most famous U.S. domestic propaganda campaigns came in the form of posters and focused on several key themes. Avenge Pearl Harbor, like the Alamo cry of an earlier era, was designed to keep the American public's anger alive and to remind them why they needed to continue fighting. Keep 'em Firing cautioned civilian workers to avoid the sins of waste, hoarding, and poor work performance. Someone Talked warned Americans against divulging sensitive information because the enemy could be listening at any time.
I just learned a secret. It's a honey. It's a pip. But the enemy is listening, so I'll never let it slip. 'Cause when I learn a secret, boy, I zipper up my lip. Hello, Ma. I got a secret. I can only drop a tip. Don't breathe a word to no one, but I'm going on a trip. Don't breathe a word to no one, but he's going on a trip.
At the local cinemas, newsreel showed the heroic deeds of the average GI and touted the great battles he won with the aid of wise officers. However, what was not said was often as telling as what was. Accounts of U.S. strategic blunders and ugly defeats were mostly suppressed, and the harsh, often gory details of the battlefield were glossed over. The Japanese domestic propaganda machine faced an even greater challenge than its American counterpart, as it was aimed not only at Japanese citizens, but also those living under Japanese rule in nearby Asian countries. The challenge was to convince the people of these conquered nations that they were better off with Japan than with the Allies. In order to promote voluntary participation in a costly war effort, Japan fostered the idea of an Asia for Asians. They used phrases like the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, instead of referring to the conquered lands as part of an expanded Japanese empire. The Japanese portrayed themselves as a compassionate force, uniting Asia against the evil of Western colonization. Japan also fostered outright hatred of the American enemy, encouraging the desecration of the U.S.'s most beloved symbols and icons. For its part, the U.S. portrayed the Japanese in equally unflattering ways. Political cartoons, posters, and films portrayed the average Japanese as sinister, ugly, and dangerous.
Extend, honorable Empire, South America, Brooklyn, Europe, take all the world.
While spreading domestic propaganda to one's own population was challenging enough, changing the hearts and minds of the enemy naturally proved more difficult. Because shortwave radios had been banned in Japan since 1932, the Allies were unable to broadcast radio messages to Japanese soldiers. As a result, the Allies were forced to take a more hands-on approach by dropping leaflets from aircraft directly over Japanese-occupied territories. These messages from above urged soldiers to surrender and told them that the true state of the war was far more dire than they were being told. They warned of impending bombing raids and promised fair treatment for those who surrendered. To counter the American influence, Japanese propagandists knew Allied servicemen had access to shortwave radios and were listening. They created slickly produced programs such as Zero Hour, which mixed popular American music with commentary from a host of women with seductive voices, collectively known as Tokyo Rose.
Hello, Yankee brothers. This is your Japanese sister, the voice of truth.
In daily broadcasts, Tokyo Rose played on the fears and desires of Allied soldiers, questioning why they fought and died in foreign lands, while their families and girlfriends were far away.
I'm filled with sadness for you because of the thousands of Japanese soldiers safe in caves and pillboxes your bombs and shells can't touch.
The Japanese also put out disinformation on Allied losses and troop movements to throw the Allied soldiers off guard and further erode their morale. A highly effective technique employed by the Japanese was to intersperse unscheduled messages from Allied prisoners of war throughout their broadcast. Families of captured servicemen often listened to entire days of programming in hopes of catching the voice of a loved one. This, too, ensured the Japanese propaganda messages were heard. As the tide of the war eventually turned against them, the Japanese aimed their propaganda machine directly at their own people and began deceiving them, obscuring Japanese losses and exaggerating those of the Allies. Crushing defeats, such as the Battle of Midway, were covered up and retold to the Empire's subjects as stunning victories. With the fall of Saipan and the commencement of intense Allied bombing raids on the mainland, Japanese propaganda took on an apocalyptic tone, emphasizing the depraved, inhuman nature of the Allied enemy and urging citizens to prepare for a suicidal fight to the death rather than accept defeat. During the war, propaganda proved to be a valuable tool for the desperate and victors alike. Equally, both Japan and the United States used any means necessary to vilify one another in an attempt to rally support behind their cause. As a testament of its prior effectiveness, today, nearly every nation has an agency devoted to propaganda. While it is the objective of these agencies to educate the public, they exist in not teaching us how to think, but moreover, what to think. Simply, this remains the agenda behind a different kind of war, a battle for our hearts and minds, otherwise known as the Thought War.
Tommy! Wake up, Tommy! They're in the camp again!
Pacific Assault is the next-generation World War II game for the Medal of Honor franchise that attempts to put the player in the most authentic, realistic, and intense environments created to date. But to do that requires a massive amount of preparation and dedication from the development team. Taking over a year and a half, development of Medal of Honor Pacific Assault can be best broken down into three core components of production: pre-production, development, and finalization. Two major developments occurred with the decision to make Pacific Assault on the PC. The first decision was that the studio wanted to build new technology. The second decision was to move the game into the Pacific Theater of Operations. While engineers spent time creating the new core technology of the game, level designers, audio engineers, artists, and animators re-educated themselves in World War II as it occurred in the Pacific.
To drive over the coral reef, just like it was on land, gets back in the water, swims the rest of the way to the beach.
The environments of Europe, as depicted in previous versions of Medal of Honor, were to be swapped with the jungles and islands of the Pacific. The German Axis enemies were going to be replaced by Japanese soldiers and warriors. The most authentic World War II game involves studying and examination of not only the conflicts, but the events, location, and people that these conflicts have affected.
This black mark here, that was the water line. That's the staining of the oil in the oil fires on the Arizona. And this round circle down here was cut open during the rescue operations when they were trying to find survivors on the ship.
Machine gun squad, take your positions!
Working with the Nimitz Museum in Texas, details such as squad tactics were studied, photographed, and analyzed by engineers responsible for the AI in the game.
Pay attention to fire discipline. It's not smart to just blow them all out there and then sit there trying to figure out how to get more ammunition while somebody maneuvers on you and hammers you.
Military advisor Dale Dye was brought in to directly instruct the development team on the finer points of combat training and tactics used in many of the conflicts. This was then followed by an in-the-field session employing those tactics with the development team in a live environment. With the Pacific Theater being America's earliest involvement in World War II, it also represented some of the early weaponry produced by the U.S. and its effectiveness in jungle conflicts. The development team's weapons modeler and audio team were debriefed on the various types of weapons used in the conflicts.
At the start of the war, we were still carrying pretty old weapons. And one of those, the primary weapon of that was the Springfield 03, which you see right here.
Learning the intricacies of the weapon, firing, reloading, photographing, and recording each of them were all keys to ensuring that Pacific Assault's in-game weapons were the most authentic and realistic ever produced for the franchise. A new core component to Pacific Assault is the ability to fly an SBD Dauntless fighter plane. Our research into flight and aeronautics for the game took us to the Plains of Fame in Chino, California. Director Mark Foster showed many of the planes used in World War II, including the featured Dauntless plane in Pacific Assault. The SBD was photographed completely so that the modeler had all the information to build it correctly for the game both inside and out.
I can't take this guy! Danny, I'm bringing him past your rear, over!
The development process for Pacific Assault consists of multiple disciplines: art, animation, audio, engineering, design, and production, constantly meeting to discuss the intricacies of development.
So the muzzle flash is fixed.
Like a full-fledged animation feature, the animators meet for dailies, a review process which in-game animation and cinematics are critiqued and complemented. At a physical point in production, various disciplines are then merged into sub-teams to tackle the levels as a group. Designers of the levels lead the way in visualizing what is still needed to achieve the full potential of each level. Whether it's audio, art, some new effects, or new animations, this is where the final polishing goes into a level.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, not a problem, Gunny. Just
just wondering why everyone knows that Tommy's the hero of the group.
Hey, you know what? What about me? Remember that one guy in that tree I potted?
Exit it back!
Towards the end of development, production then works to finalize issues and put the finishing touches on the game.
Paying courtesy calls on WAWAC and ITAP.
Footage for in-game movies is attained by the National Archives in Washington, D.C. and exhaustively reviewed.
Right. It's an indication of dirt, but it's not really.
I think it gets lost. I think we're better with a lot of these, like, there's, see these splotches and stuff here. Those things, I think, pop all the more.
The game is then opened up to various partners to best see how to cross-promote the game and maximize exposure outside the normal channels of software distribution. All of this effort is to ensure that the product itself has proper exposure when it's released to the public and that Pacific Assault has an awareness factor upon its release. From pre-production to development to finalization of the game, this is Medal of Honor Pacific Assault.
From the President of the United States to his overseas leaders in the war against the Axis powers. We'll have more information as it develops. This
This is your first action. The most important thing you have to do.
Ways up. Coming back! Get to your back! You should be in the game. Was gone. All else was darkness.
Hi, I'm Brady Bell, and I'm the director of Medal of Honor Pacific Assault. I'm going to talk a bit about the different kinds of cinematics we use in our games and the thought process behind each of them. Archival movies have been a staple of Medal of Honor games from day one. And the goal with those is to really connect the player to the location and events and even the mood of World War II before they begin playing a mission. In Pacific Assault specifically, we also use these as a story vehicle for the main player character. Because in first-person shooters, it's tough to get across the mindset of the character, we decided to, couple this archival footage with an internal monologue to drive story and show character progression over time.
Island that the Japs are hunkered down on in hopes of creating a diversion for a much
These are definitely the most straightforward movies to create for us, but require tons of upfront effort. We sent one of our producers to the National Archives in D.C., and he came back after a week with literally 100 hours of Pacific theater footage. And then the poor guy spent about 6 months categorizing the shots and then cutting them together. The Pearl Harbor cinematic that you're seeing here was especially important to us. We desperately wanted to have this moment where we could seamlessly transition from a real in-game environment that the engine is rendering to archival footage. So we spent forever matching this shot right here.
Yesterday,
December 7th,
1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Creating the teaser was no different than any other movie. Every one of them starts with a script that details shot by shot what we want to get across. And because this piece was pretty simple, we skipped traditional storyboarding in favor of 3D animatic, which is basically the roughest representation we can create to communicate the overall concept of the piece. Whether in games or movies, teaser trailers are generally created when you don't have enough material to convey the whole scope of your game. And this one here was designed based on some photographs I came across of World War II flight crews writing personal messages on bombs. They'd write the names of buddies who were killed in action and even attached, dog tags and personal effects to bombs. So if anything, this piece is a good example of budget constraints driving the creative behind the piece. If you don't have the money to create the biggest spectacle you can conjure up, it can be a blessing and force you to be more creative with tighter boundaries. Now the intro cinematic is a completely different beast. It's really the anti-teaser in some ways. Here's a case where I had zero technical or budgetary constraints and was, left to dream up that spectacle I was mentioning earlier. So immediately following, a shot list being written up, one of our artists began storyboarding this sequence and compiled it into a 2D animatic where we can get a general idea of time and pace. Man, this thing has a bunch of shots that I'm just crazy about here. This transition of the American flag going up through the clouds, coming up to the top of the pole to kind of reveal the Japanese flag, and us transitioning in space to the Japanese fleet out heading towards Pearl Harbor. But the big mistake I made on this one was starting before we had iterated on the actual, level design enough times for Pearl Harbor. So much of this just wouldn't work. But a lot of the key shots and transitions that we felt were really important actually did make its way across into the final movie. So this whole section coming up here is actually part of what we lost because of the actual level design we ended up going with. This shot pains me to lose. This was kind of a neat reveal on a farmer. All the silhouettes of the Japanese squadron kind of tearing across his land. Coming down into the harbor on, the lone sailor. Apparently he was the only guy awake that morning. This shot really hurt to lose. So the mountains swishing by in the extreme close-up. Come up to a reveal on the harbor and the squadron all kind of banks off and turns in. And here's our poor guy. Oh no, what? So as I mentioned, because of how we actually decided to design the level and have it open, this whole part wouldn't have made sense, but it was a lot of fun to develop visually. Can't do it without bomb cam. Boom. Now I think we're gonna take a look at the actual in-game cinematic that we went with. Yep. So this is the Iwo Jima Memorial, and we open on this. We kind of introduce the Marine Corps here because the game focuses solely on the Marines. We thought it right to kind of pay a little bit of tribute and give a little history behind the United States Marine Corps. These guys specifically are a part of the Silent Drill Platoon, which is, there's also a video on this on the Director's Edition version of the game you can check out. And they do this whole big routine without any voice commands of any kind, which is really neat. And our friends over at BrainZoo Studios actually took and rotoscoped every single move and motion in the entire routine, not just what we see here. And the reason that's kind of really important is you can't storyboard something like this. You really gotta build it out in 3D, push a camera around it to find what kind of motions really work well together, what kind of shots transition one into another very well, and get an overall rhythm for the piece. So we kind of do that here. We push in on the Iwo Jima Memorial, and that is kind of our transition back in time to the Japanese fleet that's steaming its way towards Pearl. So you can see a lot of the same shots that we had in the original storyboarded version. A lot of the same transitions made their way over to here that we thought were the kind of the key moments to get across. This transition here is kind of neat, that headband going into the signal flag, coming down into the guy on the deck. It's going to launch everything off with a big audio cue here, pregnant pause. Ooh, that builds tension, that's cool. And rendering a shot like this is just a tremendous amount of work. Again, the guys over at BrainZoo Studios just did an awesome job with this piece. So in-game cinematics, or cinematics that are controlled and played back within the actual game engine, are by far the most challenging of all the types of movies we do. No matter how robust your game tech is, it just can't perform some of the lighting effects or editing advantages you get with an offline package. For example, doing simple cross dissolves between two shots with motion is trivial in real editing software, but inside a real-time engine, it's very difficult because during that dissolve, you're actually rendering both of the scenes, and performance would go to hell. So not an insurmountable problem by any means. It just comes down to how much programming effort you put into that aspect of the engine, and we chose to put the majority of our engineering bandwidth into gameplay features. So putting aside nifty offline features is kind of liberating in some ways, because it makes you focus more on use of camera placement and scene management, which means you pay more attention to the different emotions you can stir up by something as simple as camera height or which way your action moves. So you can see in a shot like this, we start with our hero exiting kind of to the left, running off. And the camera kind of does this awkward pan to the right, and we see the enemy coming in going, where'd those guys go? So it's very disjointed and disconnected. You don't feel attached to those guys at all. So doing something as simple as moving the camera over and then the path of the characters, all of a sudden you're a little bit more connected, a little more invested in what's going on. It's more interesting. And you can kind of see how that iterates and grows over time, how we get multiple characters coming towards you, getting close to the camera. It becomes more intense. As well as just raising the camera up and craning up a little bit creates this kind of this sense of triumph, as well as some intensity. And you can see how the scene kind of develops and fills up as we progress through each version of this. And you have these things like the characters with the bendy legs, and all these things don't matter when you're just trying to get across pace and camera and understand how you connect to this scene. So obviously these things are a lot of fun to make. You know, they're probably on par with making the game itself. And you put these things together and you breathe life into these characters, and you get some emotion and some real personality starts to come across, and all these guys become just a little more real and a lot more fun. So there you have it. There's kind of the turbo look at making movies and Medal of Honor games. You know, it's a huge effort by a ton of people, and it's just a heck of a lot of fun, man. Case in point is this guy here. Occasionally, you even get a loopy animator who goes a little rogue on you, and you end up with this. Look at this guy go.
And Tony Romano. Keep it on this dial for AFR original airings of the Command Performances, GI Journal, and Mail Call.
The Office of Price Administration wants to